Forgive the sort of slightly unusual setup today. I look like I'm about to do a singer-songwriter gig. The builders are on their, the builders are doing their building stuff, so I wanted to limit the amount of environmental sound. So here I am with my SM57 and crooning through the mic. Today I wanted to really explore some Bach. It's going to be a bit of a deep dive. It's going to be a long video. I've done several takes of this already, trying to get it shorter, but there's a lot. Bach is a lot, and there's a lot to cover. And this is, 16 bars of fairly simple Bach music as well. It's not a fugue, it's just a dance movement. It's a double from the Lute Suite BWV 997, and the double is a variation on the preceding dance form, which is a Gigue, and the variation is done on the Bassline. And we're going to be talking a lot about the Bassline. Just wanted to say quickly about the execution of this piece. I've been working on it as a hybrid picker because I just, want to be able to play Bach hybrid style rather than having to, do classical guitar because I'm rubbish at classical guitar, but also because I want to integrate it with my jazz playing generally. And I have to say it's quite hard. So there's all sorts of questions about, how do we... what do you flat pick like this with the string skips and stuff, or this bit here. So there's all kinds of questions, but then if I'm playing this, I can play it with a pick like that, and there's a jump, or I can play it with my finger. There's all sorts of questions to answer about that, which is why it's probably a really good thing to do, a really good exercise. Again, as jazz musicians, we have a different relationship with classical repertoire. We're looking for things we can use, really, rather than sort of necessarily interpreting the repertoire for its own sake, which of course is what classical musicianship is all about. Although we can obviously do that as well if we want. But really, I'm sort of trying to take it apart today, reconstruct it, see what techniques Bach might have used or what he might be thinking, and maybe explore a little bit how we can use those on jazz standards. So I'm going to kick off right away with the bass. We're not going to talk about chord symbols right away. I want to talk a little bit about basic counterpoint. Don't worry, nothing too complicated, but it gives us an idea of what Bach is doing here. This is just the first 16 bars of this piece of music, the A section. It's an AABB piece. And it forms a little sort of nice little thing in itself. It ends each time with a E, which kind of sets us up. We can repeat it as many times as we like, basically. It's we could use it as a blowing chorus for jazz or something. But anyway, the bass line goes like this. A, G, F. So it's down the scale, but then jumps to C, then up the scale. There's a 5-1 back to A. And then we go up from the 5, using the melodic minor this time. And then back to the flat 6. We end up on an E. And that kind of gives us a sort of what might be called a half cadence, or sometimes a Phrygian cadence, which sets us up for the next pass through the changes. Well, sorry, not next pass through the changes, beg your pardon. The next part of the bass line, which is different. So while the first half sort of formed 2 discrete 4-bar phrases, this is a whole 8-bar phrase which builds towards something. It develops. So already, just looking at the bass line, we've got a really nice compositional shape to this. Okay, so this line here, if we just look at the first note of each bar, we've got, a cycle of fourths, basically. Cycle 4-chord progression, as Mick Goodrick would call it. Sorry, it should be A minor there. And then we unexpectedly jump to F sharp, and we're in the key of E minor now. That's what it sounds like to me anyway. 5, 5, 1. Okay? So that little thing, this little cycle, boom, boom. So going to the F goes from F sharp, boom. We might expect an F normally in that key. Now this is also got these passing tones, if you like, which are these notes on the second half of the bar. Which is not dissimilar to what a jazz bass player might play if they were to embellish a basic, 1/4 bar version of the cycle of fifths. Yes, it's 6-2-5-1 in this case. Should be familiar to jazz musicians. Right, so in the world of partimento in 18th century harmony, this would be considered a moti di basso, and it would be probably defined as being an upper third, upper step, upper third, upper step, you know. And in that case, there's a few different variations of harmonies you might use with it. But it would be considered actually separately from just a straightforward fourth bass line, even though we now understand it to be the same thing. Moving on, we've sort of analysed the bass line somewhat and understood where it's coming from. So how can we start to improvise on this? And one of the simplest ways is simply to use the thirds and the tenths over every single chord. I know it sounds kind of naive, but the advantage of the third is that we can move it up and down through the scale. We're never going to run into any problems with like, parallel fifths or parallel octaves, which are obviously not part of the style of this music. We don't want those things in our Bach pastiche, you know. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use thirds, and you can start to see a nice sort of skeleton or something. It's quite nice. We're mostly tenths, but it's thirds here. That sounds really logical and nice, okay? And we can use a couple of techniques to start exploring this improvisationally. There's only two notes, but we can embroider the counterpoint a little bit. And the first way is we can use scale connections. So for instance, if I'm going from this one, this is a sort of D with a minor tenth. Oh, by the way, some of the tenths you can see in the tabs. You can see that I've indicated where I've changed, usually sharped the third according to the key. So this is, you know, for instance, on the E, we might raise the G to a G sharp. We usually do that, not always, but usually. And then similarly, when we go into the E minor bit, we raise the D up to a D sharp to give us that feeling of being in E minor. This is something I do almost without thinking now, but it is quite an important part of it. Anyway, sorry. Yes, so we can run the third, down to the third, down to the third. And we do it like this. You might recognize that figure from my harmonic minor video, but all the notes, apart from the ones that we have specified as being tenths, are from the A natural minor scale in this case. Then it hits that E with a G sharp, and then another thing we can use is a suspension. So instead of just playing, changing the notes at the same time, we can actually let them fall behind and catch up. You know? You'll notice I'm using a few sevenths and things there as well. You can use the guide tones too, especially on that E7 or on the B7. And that sounds very nice if you go Zumba Zamba. Should be a major there. Anyway, so I'm just going to give you an idea of how that might sound. And I'm also anticipating that. And then you can fill in the dots here. Just losing passing tones. Maybe more suspension. Oh, sorry. Gives us a kind of weeping effect. G sharp, D sharp against the E. Very hit. Yeah. So that's the sort of thing we can just kind of get using right away. It's really nice. I'm just going to use a simple two-part counterpoint outline. A two-part counterpoint outline. A two-part counterpoint outline. Blimey, that was hard to say. Drawn from Bach himself. This is kind of a very loose sketch of what he actually wrote. And if you notice, in some ways it's simpler. He just lets that C hang out over the first three bass notes. And then here we have a sixth instead of a third. Sixths have the similar characteristics to thirds in that we can move them around like that, which is nice. We don't have to worry about them being parallel. So you can, explore using sixths as well as thirds. Anyway, use the sixth here. Third here. Another third. So it's not that different. Octave. We're going to use that as a dissonance. We're going to let that note ring out. And then another dissonance. That flat 5 against that G sharp is very nice. By the way, we're still not thinking about chords. We're just thinking about intervals above the bass note. Right? Then it's another third. We let that hang out over the F as well, so it becomes a fifth. And then a third, and then we get a flat 7th. Which resolves very nicely to the, guess what, third. That's basically what I did, only with a bit of octave displacement. C, and then we have an unexpected G sharp. Ooh! And then we get a sixth, a sharp sixth in this case, and then it widens out to an octave via contrary motion, the treble going up, the bass going down. Then we get a third by contrary, and then it carries on. You get a 7th there, which is nice. And then that resolves beautifully to a third. And then another 7th, because why not? Which resolves to an octave. Okay, so hopefully you can see where we have got tense intervals, like flat 5s, and it builds a bit of tension there with the 8, they go into 7, this bit here. And it resolves in an unexpected place on the weak side of the bar. But on the whole, we have a bit of tension. We have a 7th or a sharp 6th or something, or a, flat 7, whatever it is. And then the next chord, next interval, should I say, is consonant. So this is like typical kind of, when you do your first species counterpoint, gradasapanasam stuff, that's what you study. And this would be, I suppose, mostly first species counterpoint, if I remember correctly. Well, anyway, it's been years since I studied any of that stuff. And now I just wanted to show you the 3-part counterpoint outline. Now, 3 parts are as much as I'm willing to go on guitar. I know traditionally Bach harmony is taught in 4 voices, because that's tradition. Soprano, alto, tenor, bass. And the chorales are written in 4 voices, so that's probably why people do it. On the guitar, I guess kind of find 4-voice stuff kind of clunky. It doesn't really matter whether it's jazz harmony or, this kind of common practice harmony. I just find it kind of, it gets choppy. It's like this kind of stuff. Which is a texture in itself, Wes Montgomery obviously loved it. But at the same time, it's kind of, 3 voices gives you a lot more room for counterpoint. So as you can hear, it sounds quite a lot like a chorale. If I break it up into arpeggios, for instance, I can improvise this way. And that's one way you can start to explore those harmonies. Bach obviously explores them linearly, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But let's move to chord symbols now, because, hey, we're jazz musicians. And obviously the Baroque system is based on counterpoint and it's figured bass, and I've used it a little bit here just to show the intervals above the bass, and that's basically all figured bass does, with a bit of shorthand. So I've indicated the figured bass for these things called the rule of the octave. We'll talk about that in a second, but I've also used the chord symbols as well to make them accessible to jazz people. Now, the thing is, not all implementations of this are going to sound equally good, so you might need to use your ears and your theory knowledge a bit. But the rule of the octave is essentially a way of harmonizing the bass notes through the scale. So in this case, A minor. I'm going to use the classical melodic minor, which means it's going up using the melodic minor, as we call it in jazz, and coming down using the lateral minor or the Aeolian mode, right? So the chords that we use are these. I'm just going to play them block chord style. Then it's that, and then that, and then that. Coming down. And you can break that up and use suspensions and things. Okay, so you can do nice things with that. Not a lot of 18th century music spends its time going up and down the scale like that all the time, but you can see already from the beginning of the bass line, that scale, then it jumps, then it's up a scale, then it goes 5-1, then it's up a scale from 5. So there's actually quite a bit of that stuff, and this is where the rule of the octave comes in really handy. However, we also have a little sneaky key change, so you can think of the whole piece as being in sort of A minor for 8 bars, and then it moves to C major, for 4 bars, and then to E minor for 4 bars. So you've got to know the rule of the octave in E minor as well. We're not going to do C major because the C major chord progression is just a cycle of 4, so we know how to harmonize that because we played All the Things You Are and Autumn Leaves and Fly Me to the Moon, all those tunes, so we know something about that chord progression already. E minor, this is E minor. This reminds me a bit of a song by Gigue. Anyway, sorry, that's not what we're playing. We're playing this rule of the octave. Coming down. So, if we take this and apply it to our bass, okay, that fits. The rule of the octave again. A minor over C, D minor 6th, E major or E7, A minor. And then we get this bit going up, which is like going up from 5 to 1. And then, even though this doesn't move stepwise really, it kind of still fits the rule. Then we got our little bit here. So for here, I'm just going to use an inversion of A minor 7 here, an inversion of D minor 7 there, version of G7 here, B7 over F sharp, E minor. So using the E minor rule of the octave. And we have an unexpected resolution to E major here. So one way I like to manage this is we've got the B7 here. So we're using that shape. Move the bass to E. And then move to E major. So it's like a double suspension. And then back to the top again. And then excuse me. So that's one way you can improvise with that. I think it sounds pretty nice. Now, I just wanted to sort of indicate that Bach's actual chords are not that different. He's made a few very nice changes, though. So at the beginning, we actually don't move the chords. It's just the A minor hanging out over the changing bass. And then slightly richer version of E7, E7 flat 9 for us jazzers. Sorry, I'll play that again. And then, instead of using for this bit, an D over F sharp, uses an F sharp diminished, a slightly richer chord, going to E7 over G sharp. And then A minor, F6, instead of the D minor over F. E7. Now this is more interesting because although he doesn't really do much to the first 8 bars, it gets really interesting here because instead of using just an inversion of A minor, he uses C7, which is a really cool sound. Going to D minor, so kind of almost, feels like, he's turning into an A7, but he's not, it's just a C7. But that B flat is a powerful pull into D minor there, I think. Then it's an F major 7th. It's all the way down to the D and the G, very nice. And then an unexpected E7 there, which kind of, I'm not quite sure how that works, but it sounds good. I almost think we're still in A minor at this point in a weird sort of way, because he's almost setting up like a cadence. This A minor over E chord, which sounds beautiful, is kind of a 6/4 chord, and usually you'd expect to find that on the 5 A minor, so it almost feels like he hasn't changed key yet until he gets to this. And then now we feel like we're going to E. We expect this, but we get this. The E major, classic tierce de Picardy, which also functions as a half cadence getting back to A minor when we play the repeat. Isn't that clever? So this is kind of really a Bachian chord progression, I think, of... gosh, it's epic. And, it's something you find in Beethoven as well. I think of the Moonlight Sonata and things of that nature. It's a very beautiful way to embellish. I think what really is just an E7 chord at that point. The A minor is usually thought of as a kind of double suspension again of the E7. In the case of a cadence to A minor, you might have something like this. So on, and then we go to, like that. But then by embellishing it like this, it's going, and then boom, boom, boom. Oh, I love that. And then, how Bach is that? That's really Bach. That's like 10 out of 10 Bach, that is. What a nice way to play a cadence. Okay, so if I look at the Gigue, actually, from the previous movement, the actual chords are a lot more similar to the rule of the octave chords. And here, Bach embellishes using a 4/3, really. So he takes the fourth and he resolves it into the third. So a good example is just like from the opening few bars of this piece. So each time it's like a fourth going into the third. Fourth into minor third. Fourth. Sharp fourth, but it still functions the same. Going to third. And when I write out the chord symbols for that, I kind of don't actually reflect any of that in it. I just say A minor, E minor over G, because that's kind of how we write out Stella by Starlight, and that has the same trick in it. It's going, yeah, yeah. So, if I simplify it down again. So, very similar. We're leaning on the dissonance. We're kind of making the dissonance on the beat rather than on the upbeat, and that kind of creates a weeping effect. For instance, if I put it here in the descending bass line at the start, it does have that kind of effect. So yadom, nadom, yadom, yadom. You know, it's very, very expressive. I thought gigs were meant to be happy. They're like the jigs, aren't they? Gigs. I'd like a gig. That'd be nice. Okay, right. So, you know, like obviously we can take these chords and turn them into jazz chords as well if we wanted to. You know, we could go, I don't know, turn into an A minor major 7th or an A minor 6th or something. And when you do that, it kind of starts, you know, especially if you play with like bossa field. Or tango or something, you know, or, you know, maybe a... kind of almost gets us into the realm of sort of like things like Richard Galliano, slightly kind of Gallic kind of film music-y vibe. It needs accordion, what can I say? So I just wanted to move on to what gets called in partimento circles, it calls diminutions. I've heard them called divisions and lute playing. This is basically decorations of simple things using lots of notes. So while the harmonic framework of Bach's piece might be something like this at the beginning, he actually expands it into this. And so on, right? So there's a lot of activity going on, and this activity is all in 16th notes or semiquavers in the piece. This little anacrusis is this kind of pickup. This is a very simple scalar passage targeting the third. And then we just play the arpeggio like that. And then we have a little lower neighbor tune, which is just like that, really. And then we can actually take this through the scale, so we can use a rule of the octave if you want, or that might be a nice way of doing it. I don't know. Use your ears, I think, is my best advice. Maybe, or it could be like that. So up the harmonic, up the melodic minor there. Coming down. That sounds a bit basic. I don't like that, so I might change the, you know. Yeah, change it to first inversion chord. And then just change the bass note, but keep the chord the same. And then, I don't know. So that's a good exercise to do. There's a few other little ones. One of the most important is this. I noticed, like, Bach's use of rhythm, sometimes he's accenting on the one, so ba-ya, boo-da, boom, bum. But sometimes he's accenting on the second note, so ba-ya, boom, da-da, ba-bo-da, bo-ya, boom, zoom. So ba-ya, bo-da-da, da-ya, da-ya. So that gives you a little bit more of a lilt to it. So again, you can maybe, in this case, he does it by taking, in this figure, which is on the C, F6, he goes, just takes that note and puts it down an octave. Pivots it, as Barry Harris would say. And that creates the accent tends to go on the top note in the line. Any bebopper will know that. So because your E is drawn to the C, so it kind of creates a different. So on, right? So again, you can take that through the octave. I'm not going to do that right now. I mean, let's take the other figure, this one here. Not unlike the first one, except this time we're going down the scale. We've got that little lower neighbor. And you can go up to the scale with that. And then, sorry. That's this. Nice like that. What note are we on? That's the one, and then so I mean a bit clumsy, but very, very good to practice this stuff through the octave. You might also want to put these things through the cycle as well. So let's take our little last little figure. We'll go A minor, D minor, G, C, like that. So on, right? Really good thing to do. I just want to talk about the way that Bach treats this cadence. So it's like a D minor, E major, A minor, and he just plays that scale thing down to the third that I discussed earlier, and then he jumps up to the F to encircle the C on the next chord. This is a very bebop thing to do. You know. But that, you know, again, that's an octave displacement technique, right? Bach and Parker and all these people really liked octave displacement things. That's what it would be, but we... And that creates, again, that interesting rhythm that I noted earlier. So the octave displacement thing can be used to create interesting rhythm, and that's how it's often used in jazz, to be honest. So, you know, for instance... Or, you know, only in jazz our default state is to be syncopated and play rhythms that don't fall on the beat, whereas in classical music it's used for special effect, even in Bach, which is quite rhythmically complex compared to other Western music. Okay, so that's a few techniques you can use. I just wanted to quickly talk about these interesting arpeggios of R5. I'll make a link to the music available, because otherwise it probably won't make much sense, this video, generally. So, it's always like a straightforward E7 grip, but Bach does this. Using a D sharp. Now here, the D sharp is really functioning as a chromatic lower neighbor going to E, right? The finger encourages you to make it skronk like this, which sounds really cool. And of course that D sharp is the major seventh over the E7. Ah! Should be wrong, but it sounds great. Okay? Then we've got this interesting voicing. Again, that rub. This is now an F sharp diminished chord, but this is quite an interesting way of playing it. I don't know why you call that grip. Drop 2-4 or something. Anyway, it's a cool one. And then we've got on top of that an E. Wow. Now, that's the interesting thing. You get mega skronky chords in Bach, but they're all prepared and they're all resolved. There's a grammar behind them, whereas in jazz, we just go like, hey, check out my sixth substitution. For what? I don't know. Is it a D7? Who can tell? Right, so that sort of thing is very interesting to me. Like, and even though Bach didn't actually play the lute, it seems really well suited to a stringed instrument to have that ringing E going on over the top. I don't know how much of that is editorial, or it's an interesting way of playing a it's an interesting way of playing a I was going to say it's an interesting way of playing a E7 chord, but then I got distracted. Yeah, anyway, so I really like that. That's cool. And you should experiment with things like that yourself, just using lower neighbor tones just to create intrigue and sort of dissonance. Dissonance is something that Bach used very, very effectively, of course. And I think, there's just a little thing to note about this sequence thing that goes on. So typically you find sequences on cycle of fourth progressions. It's very common, like Autumn Leaves is a sequence, for instance. And by sequence I mean it's the same melodic motif, just transposed over each chord. Now, in the case of the Bach piece, because it's longer phrase, we're kind of transposing it over 2 basses. So we're going over the A and then over the C, then over the D and then over the F. So there's 2 phrases. The first one is like this. So it's third to 1, lower neighbor, back to the third. So it's like 3, passing tone, 1, passing tone, 1, 3. So you can fit that over different chords. Let's fit it over. It's the one we've dealt with before, basically, just a minute ago. And then this one. But we have another phrase which is kind of describes the 7th chord a bit better. And this one is based on going from the 3rd. I'll do it on a C major chord. We go up from the 3rd to the 5th, and then we jump over to the 7th. And we come down to the 5th. So that's for a major 7th. For a dominant 7th, it'd be this, which actually we get after that one. So we get the same thing for F major 7th, using a raised 4th in this case, because it's diatonic to the key. And then this thing again. And the same thing again for E7. So that's a nice little pattern. I thought I'd just finish up with a little bit of, I'm just going to play a little bit of Yesterday's, baroqued up a little bit. One thing, a couple of techniques I'm using, just to tell you. So I don't, rather than repeating that, I'm going to do a little bit more of a rule of the octave type thing. And then there's this chromatic bass, so using the 6th chord and the 7th, the 4-2. So that's just like first inversion, 3rd inversion to get that chromatic bass line. And then we're going to use major triad going to 7th chord on the 3rd, which will be a half diminished each time or a full diminished if you prefer, but I'm going to use half diminished here. This would be a better voicing. Augmented 6th. And then our decorating diminished chord, which sounds super Bach. That's one way of doing it. So something like this. The suspension works really nicely there. You could also do it on, what is this thing called, Love? So it's a similar sort of thing. Which I rather like. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. This is still a work in progress for me, so I'm still sort of developing my ability to apply this stuff to standards. But it's slowly making sense, and I hope you're enjoying going on this weird journey with me. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you soon. Bye.